Welcome back to WhisperDark. If this is your first time here, you picked an interesting night to start. Tonight's story comes from a man named James. He was 31 years old. He lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. He had moved there 6 months earlier after leaving a job he hated and a city that had started to feel like a cage. Portland felt like a fresh start. Quiet streets, cold mornings, a house with a yard and no neighbors close enough to bother him. He thought the isolation would feel like freedom. He was wrong. James worked remotely as a software developer. His days were long and his evenings were quiet. He cooked his own meals, took walks in the evening, and went to bed early. He had no pets, no visitors, and no real reason to leave the house most days. He was, by his own admission, a man who paid very little attention to his surroundings. That was his first mistake. His second mistake was the camera. 3 weeks after moving in, James bought a security camera for his front porch. Not because he was worried. Not because anything had happened. He bought it simply because his sister had asked him to. She lived 2 states away and worried about him living alone in an unfamiliar neighborhood. He installed it on a Saturday afternoon, pointed it at the front yard and the street beyond, set it up on his phone so he could check the live feed any time. He checked it once that first evening, saw nothing but an empty yard and a quiet street, and then forgot about it entirely for almost 2 weeks. It was a Tuesday evening in November when he finally opened the app again. He was sitting on his couch after dinner, scrolling through his phone out of boredom, when he accidentally tapped the camera app icon. The live feed opened. The yard was dark. The street beyond was empty. The single street light at the end of his driveway cast a pale yellow circle on the pavement. He was about to close the app when he noticed the motion history log on the left side of the screen. The camera had recorded motion events every single night for the past 11 days. Every single night. At exactly 3 a.m., James felt something shift in his chest. A slow, cold unease. He told himself it was probably an animal, a fox or a raccoon cutting across the yard in the dark. He tapped on the first recording. The timestamp read November 4th, 3 a.m. The footage opened. The yard was dark and still. The streetlight buzzed softly in the corner of the frame. And then, from the left side of the frame, a figure walked into the shot. A man. He walked slowly and deliberately across James's front yard, right through the middle of the camera's field of view, and stopped directly in front of the house. He stood there for a moment, and then he turned and faced the camera. Directly, deliberately, like he knew exactly where it was. He stood perfectly still and looked into the lens for exactly 40 seconds. Then he turned and walked back the way he came, off the left side of the frame, into the dark. James sat on his couch and watched the footage 3 times in a row. The man was not a neighbor he recognized. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket, hands in his pockets. His face was partially obscured by shadow, but his posture was calm, unhurried, completely unafraid, like a man who had done this many times before. James checked the next recording. November 5th, 3 a.m. Same man, same path across the yard, same stop directly in front of the house, same 40 seconds facing the camera. He checked every single recording after that. 11 nights, 11 recordings. 11 times the same man walked across his yard at 3 a.m., stopped and stared directly into the camera. Always at 3 a.m., always 40 seconds. always the same. James called the police that night. An officer came out the following morning, reviewed the footage, and filed a report. They told him it was likely someone from the neighborhood, possibly someone who had lived near that property before and had a strange habit. They would patrol the area. James thanked them and closed the door. He did not sleep that night, or the night after. On the 12th night, James decided he wasn't going to just watch on his phone. He set an alarm for 2:45 a.m. He got up, turned off every light in the house, and sat in the darkness of his living room window with a clear view of the front yard. He waited. At 2:59 a.m., he saw movement at the left edge of his yard. The figure appeared. Same dark jacket. Same slow, deliberate walk. He crossed the yard exactly as he had every night before and stopped in front of the house. But this time, he didn't look at the camera. He looked directly at the window, directly at James. James did not move, did not breathe. The man outside stood perfectly still in the dark yard, staring at the window for a long time. Then he raised one hand, slowly, and pointed, not at the. James did not open the door. He sat in the dark living room, completely still, watching the man outside stand in his yard with one arm raised and one finger pointed directly at his front door. Neither of them moved for a long time. Then the man slowly lowered his arm, turned around, and walked back into the dark. James sat in that chair until sunrise. He did not sleep. The next morning, James called the police again. He told them what he had seen with his own eyes this time. Not just footage. A real man. Standing in his yard in the middle of the night, pointing at his door. The officer who came out was the same one from before. He walked the perimeter of the yard, checked the street, and found nothing. No footprints in the soft grass. No cigarette butts. No signs that anyone had stood there at all. The officer looked at James with an expression that was carefully neutral. He suggested James consider motion-activated floodlights. Maybe a dog. James thanked him and closed the door again. He stood in the hallway for a moment after the officer left. And that was when he noticed it. On the inside of his front door, at about chest height, there was a mark, a small circle, drawn in something dark, no bigger than a coin. He hadn't put it there. He had no idea when it had appeared. He had no idea how anyone could have put it there from the outside. He painted over it that same afternoon, used the leftover wall paint from the move, covered it completely, pressed his hand against the painted surface when it dried to make sure it was gone. It was gone. He went to bed that night with every light in the house on. He slept, eventually. Exhaustion won. He woke up at 6 a.m. feeling like he hadn't slept at all. He made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the wall. Then he got up to check the camera app on his phone. The motion log showed one event, 3 a.m. As always, but this time the footage was different. The man did not appear from the left side of the frame. He did not walk across the yard. He did not stop in front of the house. This time the camera had captured movement from directly below, the corner of the front porch, just outside the front door. The figure crouched at the base of the door, stayed there for exactly 40 seconds, then moved back out of frame. The camera had not triggered any alerts. No notification had come through to James's phone. He had slept through it. The man had been at his front door, while he slept 3 feet away on the other side of it. James packed a bag that morning. He called his sister. He was going to stay with her for a week, he said. just needed a change of scenery. He kept his voice steady. He did not tell her about the man in the yard. He locked every door and window, set the camera to send alerts for any motion at all, day or night, got in his car and drove. He was 3 hours into the drive when his phone buzzed. A camera alert. Daytime, 11 a.m. He pulled over on the side of the highway and opened the app. The footage showed his front yard in clear daylight, and standing in the middle of it, in full view, wearing the same dark jacket, was the man. He was not hiding. He was not creeping in the dark. It was the middle of the morning, and he was standing in James's front yard like he owned it. He was holding something. James squinted at the screen, trying to make out what it was. It looked like a photograph. The man held it up toward the camera for a moment. Then he tucked it under his arm, turned, and walked slowly down the driveway and out of frame. James sat on the side of the highway for a long time. Then he turned the car around. He got back to the house just before 3 p.m. The front yard was empty. The street was quiet. Nothing seemed disturbed. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was exactly as he had left it. Every window locked. Every door shut. Nothing moved or missing. He walked through every room. Kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, spare room, nothing. He came back to the hallway and stood in front of the door. And then he looked down at the spot where he had painted over the mark the day before. The paint was still there, smooth and dry, but through it, faintly but unmistakably, the circle had returned. Dark, deliberate, perfectly round, and this time there was something inside it, a word, written so small he had to lean in close to read it. He leaned in, he read it, he stepped back. The word was his name, his full name, first, middle, and last, written on the inside of his own front door, in handwriting that was not his. James called the police for the third time. This time, 2 officers came. They photographed the mark on the door. They took the camera footage. They took a formal statement. They told him they would escalate the case and look into recent reports of stalking in the area. One of the officers pulled him aside before they left. She asked him a question that stopped him cold. She asked him if he had lived at this address before. James said no. He had only moved in 6 months ago. The officer nodded slowly. She said the previous tenant of the house had filed similar reports. A man watching the property at night. Marks appearing on doors and windows. She said the case had been filed and then closed when the previous tenant moved out suddenly and could not be reached for follow-up. James asked what the previous tenant's name was. The officer checked her notes. She told him. James did not recognize the name. He thanked her and she left. He stood in the hallway alone. And then, very slowly, a thought formed in the back of his mind. He went to his laptop, opened a browser, typed in the name the officer had given him. The first result was a missing persons report filed 8 months ago. The previous tenant of James's house had been reported missing by his family. He had stopped returning calls, stopped showing up to work. His car was found parked 2 streets away from the house. He was never found. James did not stay in the house that night. He drove to a motel 20 minutes away, paid cash, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark with his phone in his hand. He opened the camera app one more time. The yard was empty. The street was quiet. The streetlight buzzed at the end of the driveway. He was about to put the phone down when a new alert came through. Motion detected. Front porch, 11:47 p.m. He opened the footage. The man was there, standing on the porch this time, right at the front door. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the photograph James had seen him carrying earlier that day. He held it up to the camera, and this time James could see it clearly. It was a photograph of James, taken from outside his living room window. James sitting in his chair in the dark, on the night he had watched the man through the window. The man had been watching him back, the whole time. He had been photographing James through his own window while James sat in the dark thinking he was the one doing the watching. James went to the police station in person the next morning. He showed them the new footage. He showed them the photograph of himself being photographed. The detective assigned to his case studied the footage carefully. Then she looked up at James and asked him to sit down. She told him that the camera footage had been reviewed by their technical team overnight, and they had found something in the earlier recordings that James had not noticed. In the very first recording. November 4th, the night James had first discovered the motion history log. In the background of the footage, just barely visible at the far edge of the frame, past the streetlight at the end of the driveway. A second figure, standing completely still in the shadows, watching. Not the man in the dark jacket. Someone else entirely. Someone who had been there every single night, standing at the very edge of the camera's range, completely motionless, for all 11 recordings. James stared at the still image the detective slid across the desk toward him. The second figure was too far away and too deep in shadow to make out any features. Except one. They were wearing the same jacket as James. The exact same jacket. The one currently hanging on the hook beside his front door at the house he was no longer sleeping in. The investigation is still open. James has not returned to that house. His belongings were collected by a removal company while 2 officers stood watch. He now lives in an apartment on the 14th floor of a building in central Portland with a doorman and a security desk. He has not installed any cameras. He says he is done watching. The man in the dark jacket was never identified. The missing previous tenant was never found. The second figure in the footage was never explained. And the photograph, the one the man held up to the camera, the one showing James sitting in his own dark living room on the night he thought he was alone, that photograph was never recovered either, which means someone still has it. Somewhere. That is a story James sent me. He says he still thinks about the second figure, the one wearing his jacket, the one standing at the edge of the frame every single night, watching from the dark. He says the thing that keeps him awake is not the man in the yard. It is the question he cannot answer. If the man in the dark jacket was the one being watched by the second figure, and the second figure was wearing James's jacket, then who exactly was being followed? And who was doing the following? I don't have an answer for that. I'm not sure anyone does. Thank you for spending this time with WhisperDark. If you have a story, something that happened to you that you cannot explain, something you have never told anyone because you were afraid they wouldn't believe you, send it to me. Every submission is read. Every story is considered. New episode every week? Subscribe. Hit the notification bell. And share this with someone you want to keep awake tonight. I'll see you next week. Sleep well, if you still can.